The morning sun filtered through the classroom windows at Riverside Elementary, casting long shadows across the desks. 8-year-old Michael sat in the back corner, his lunchbox clutched tightly on his lap even though it was only 9 in the morning. He learned early on that keeping his things close meant fewer chances of someone hiding them or throwing them in the trash. Today started like most days. As children filed into the classroom, several boys walked past his desk. One of them knocked his pencil case onto the floor, scattering crayons everywhere. They laughed and kept walking. Michael bent down slowly to pick them up, his movements careful and deliberate. By the time he collected everything, the teacher had already started the lesson. "Michael, please pay attention," Mrs. Patterson said from the front of the room, not unkindly, but not understanding either. He nodded and tried to focus on the math problems on the board. Numbers swirled in his vision, refusing to make sense the way they did for other kids. He knew he was different. Kids reminded him every single day. They imitated the way he talked. They ran away when he tried to join their games at recess. During group projects, everyone groaned when the teacher assigned him to their team. The worst part wasn't even the mean kids. It was the ones who pretended he didn't exist at all. They looked right through him in the hallway. When he said hello, they acted like the air had spoken. That hurt more than any nasty word. Lunchtime was always the hardest. Michael walked into the cafeteria carrying his blue lunchbox with cartoon characters on it. His mom packed his favorite today, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich cut into triangles, apple slices, and cookies shaped like dinosaurs. She always added a little note that said, "Love you," with a smiley face. Those notes were sometimes the only kind words he received all day. He looked around the cafeteria, searching for a place to sit. Every table seemed full, or at least that's what the other kids claimed when he approached. He'd learned to head straight for the table in the far corner, the one near the trash cans where nobody wanted to sit. He ate his sandwich slowly, watching other kids laugh and share snacks and make plans for after school. Sometimes he imagined what it would feel like to have someone save him a seat, to have a friend who wanted to sit next to him. A group of 5th graders at the next table started pointing at him and whispering. One of them made a face, contorting his features in an exaggerated way. The others burst into laughter. Michael looked down at his lunchbox and pretended he didn't see. His appetite disappeared, but he kept chewing anyway. His mom would ask about lunch when he got home, and he didn't want to worry her. The school counselor once told him to just ignore them, as if that was some kind of magic solution. But how do you ignore feeling invisible and too visible at the same time? How do you ignore eating lunch alone every single day, while other kids complain about having too many friends? After school, Michael's mom picked him up in their old sedan. She smiled brightly when she saw him, the way she always did. "How was your day, sweetheart?" "Good," he lied, because telling the truth would make her sad, and he hated when his mom was sad. She worked so hard to make everything okay for him. She fought with the school to get him the help he needed. She drove him to therapy appointments and doctor visits. She stayed up late helping with homework that took him 3 times longer than other kids. The least he could do was not make her cry. But his mom wasn't fooled. She never was. She saw the way his shoulders slumped. She noticed he hadn't finished his lunch. As they drove home, she reached over and squeezed his hand. "I love you so much, Michael. You know that, right?" "I know, Mom." That evening, Michael sat in the living room doing homework while his parents made dinner. He could hear them talking in the kitchen, their voices low but urgent. His dad said something about maybe trying a different school, and his mom replied that running away won't solve anything. They thought he couldn't hear them, but he heard everything. He heard his mom crying late at night sometimes. He heard his dad angrily call the school after particularly bad incidents. He wanted to tell them he was okay. He wanted to be stronger for them. But the truth was, he was tired. So tired of trying to fit in. Tired of working twice as hard just to keep up. Tired of smiling when he felt like breaking. After dinner, Michael went to his room to get ready for bed. That's when he heard it, music drifting up from downstairs. His dad was watching a movie and the soundtrack was playing. It was a piano piece, something classical and beautiful. Michael froze in the hallway, his toothbrush still in his hand. Something about the music made his heart beat faster. The notes seemed to speak a language he understood better than words. He crept down the stairs and stood in the doorway, mesmerized by the sounds coming from the television. His whole body responded to the melody. His fingers twitched as if trying to catch the notes floating through the air. His mom noticed him standing there. "Do you like that music, honey?" He couldn't explain it, but something inside him connected to those piano keys in a way that nothing else ever had. "It's pretty," he said, which didn't capture even a fraction of what he felt. The next few days, something shifted inside Michael. School was still hard. Kids were still mean. Lunch was still lonely. But now he had something else occupying his mind. He found himself humming melodies he'd heard, tapping rhythms on his desk. When the music teacher played songs during class, Michael's attention locked in with an intensity that surprised everyone, including himself. During one music class, the teacher let students try different instruments. Most kids banged on drums or blew randomly into recorders. When Michael sat at the small keyboard in the corner, his fingers touched the keys with an almost reverent gentleness. He pressed one key, then another, listening carefully to each sound. It wasn't a song yet, just exploration. But something about the way he approached the instrument made the music teacher pause and watch. That weekend, Michael's parents took him to the park. While his dad pushed him on the swings, his mom sat on a bench nearby, scrolling through her phone. She was researching something, reading intently with that focused expression she got when she was trying to solve a problem. Later that evening, after Michael went to bed, his parents had a long conversation. His mom had been looking into music lessons. She'd read articles about how music could help children with Down syndrome, but more than that, she'd seen the light in her son's eyes when he heard that piano music. She'd watched him come alive in a way that schoolwork never made him feel. "It's expensive," his dad said, looking at the numbers. "I know, but when was the last time you saw him excited about something? Really excited?" His dad was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Let me pick up some extra shifts. We'll make it work." Neither of them knew it yet, but that decision would change everything. Not just for Michael, but for everyone who thought they knew what he was capable of. A small seed had been planted, and it was about to grow into something nobody could have predicted. All Michael knew as he drifted off to sleep that night was that those piano sounds kept echoing in his dreams, calling to something deep inside him that had been waiting patiently to be discovered. 3 weeks later, Michael stood on the front porch of a small house on Maple Street, holding his mom's hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. A wooden sign hung by the door that read, "Piano Lessons, Mrs. Rodriguez." His stomach twisted with nerves. What if he wasn't good enough? What if this teacher didn't want to teach him once she realized how different he was? The door opened and a woman in her 70s appeared, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "You must be Michael," she said warmly. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Nobody had ever said they were looking forward to meeting him before. Michael managed a small smile and followed her inside. The house smelled like vanilla and old books. In the living room sat a beautiful upright piano, its dark wood polished to a shine. Sheet music was stacked neatly on a nearby shelf, and photos covered the walls. Pictures of Mrs. Rodriguez when she was younger, performing in concert halls, shaking hands with important-looking people. "That was a long time ago," Mrs. Rodriguez said, noticing Michael staring at the photos, "before my hands got old and my back started complaining. But I still love music just as much as I did back then, maybe even more." She invited Michael to sit on the piano bench beside her. His mom settled into a chair in the corner, watching nervously. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't start with lectures or rules or warnings about how hard piano would be. Instead, she simply played. Her aged fingers moved across the keys, producing a melody so beautiful that Michael forgot to be nervous. He forgot about school and mean kids and feeling different. He just listened. When she finished, she turned to him. "Your turn." "But I don't know how," Michael said quietly. "Nobody knows how at first. That's why we learn." She guided his right hand to the keys, positioning his fingers. "Just press this one." "Go ahead." Michael pressed the key. A single note rang out, clear and pure. "Beautiful," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Now this one." They spent that first lesson simply exploring sounds. No complicated songs, no pressure. Just Michael discovering what each key could do. Sometimes Mrs. Rodriguez would play a note and ask him to find the same one. He got it right more often than not, which surprised his mom. When the hour ended, Michael didn't want to leave. "Same time next week?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. Michael nodded eagerly. On the drive home, he couldn't stop talking about the piano, about the sounds, about how nice Mrs. Rodriguez was. His mom kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, amazed. This was the most animated she'd seen him in months. The lessons became the highlight of Michael's week. Every Tuesday afternoon, he'd rush out of school actually excited for once. While other kids dreaded their after-school activities, Michael counted down the minutes until he could sit at that piano bench. Mrs. Rodriguez proved to be unlike any teacher Michael had ever known. When he struggled to read sheet music the traditional way, she didn't get frustrated. Instead, she pulled out colored stickers and placed them on the keys. Red for C, blue for D, green for E. Then she wrote the notes in matching colors on simplified sheets. Suddenly, the confusing black dots on lines made sense. Every person learns differently, she told his mom one afternoon. Michael's brain just needs to see patterns in a different way. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, some of the most creative musicians I've known thought outside the box. Progress came slowly. Some weeks, Michael would forget everything they'd worked on the previous lesson. Mrs. Rodriguez never sighed or showed disappointment. She'd simply start again, patient as ever. "The piano will wait for you," she'd say. "It's not going anywhere." But then there were the breakthrough moments. Like the day Michael played Mary Had a Little Lamb with both hands for the first time. His face lit up with pure joy, and he played it 17 more times in a row just because he could. Or the afternoon when he figured out how to play a chord progression by ear after hearing it just twice. Mrs. Rodriguez actually gasped. "Michael," she said carefully, "did I teach you that?" He shook his head. "I just heard it and my fingers knew where to go." She exchanged a meaningful glance with his mom. This wasn't just a child learning piano. This was something special. At school, things hadn't improved much. Michael still ate lunch alone. Kids still made fun of him. But now he had a secret that kept him going. During class, when things got hard or someone said something mean, he'd imagine sitting at Mrs. Rodriguez's piano. He'd think about the songs he was learning, the way the keys felt under his fingers. It was like having a safe place he could visit in his mind. One day during recess, Michael sat under a tree humming a melody he'd been practicing. A girl from his class walked by and stopped. "That's pretty," she said. "What song is that?" Michael looked up, surprised she was talking to him. "It's called Ode to Joy. I'm learning it on piano." "You play piano?" She sounded genuinely interested. "Yeah, every Tuesday." "That's cool." She smiled and walked away to join her friends, but it was the first normal conversation Michael had with a classmate in months. Something so small, yet it made his whole day brighter. 6 months into lessons, Mrs. Rodriguez introduced Michael to a piece that would change everything, Beethoven's Für Elise. It was more complex than anything he'd attempted before, with tricky fingering and passages that required real concentration. "This is hard," Michael said after his first attempt left him fumbling over the keys. "The best things usually are," Mrs. Rodriguez replied. "But I wouldn't give it to you if I didn't think you could do it." "I believe in you, Michael. The question is, do you believe in yourself?" Nobody had ever asked him that before. Did he believe in himself? At school, he'd learned not to. Every failed test, every eye roll from classmates, every time he was picked last for teams taught him that he wasn't capable of much. But here, with this piano, something felt different. "I want to try," he said quietly. "Then we'll try together." They broke the piece down into tiny sections, just 4 measures at a time. Michael practiced the opening bars until his fingers moved through them automatically. Then the next 4 measures. Then the next. Some weeks he mastered whole phrases. Other weeks he struggled with a single line. Mrs. Rodriguez never rushed him. At home, Michael's parents bought an old keyboard from a thrift store so he could practice. It wasn't as nice as Mrs. Rodriguez's piano, but Michael didn't care. He practiced before school, after homework, even on weekends. His dad joked that they were going to wear out the keys. His mom would sometimes stand in the doorway listening, tears in her eyes. This was the son she'd always known was inside, focused, determined, passionate. The world just hadn't given him the right way to show it until now. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed the change too. Michael arrived at lessons having memorized sections she'd only introduced the week before. His confidence grew with each passing month. He sat taller at the piano bench. He smiled more. When he made mistakes, he didn't give up. He tried again. "You know," Mrs. Rodriguez said one afternoon, "I've taught hundreds of students over the years. Some of them were technically perfect. They could play anything you put in front of them. But you know what they lacked?" Michael looked at her curiously. "Heart. They played the notes, but they didn't feel the music. You, Michael, you feel every single note. When you play, you're not just pressing keys. You're telling a story. That's a gift. Michael wasn't sure he believed her completely, but her words planted a seed of confidence that began to take root. Maybe he wasn't good at math. Maybe he'd never be the fastest reader. Maybe he'd always be different from other kids. But when he sat at that piano, none of that mattered. For the first time in his life, Michael had found something he was genuinely good at. Something that was completely his. And with each lesson, each practice session, each small victory, he was becoming someone he never imagined he could be. The piano was teaching him more than music. It was teaching him to believe in himself. And that belief would soon be tested in ways he couldn't yet imagine. 2 years had passed since Michael's first piano lesson. He was now 11 years old and in middle school, which brought a whole new set of challenges. The building was bigger, the kids were meaner, and the pressure to fit in felt even more impossible than before. But Michael had something now that he didn't have in elementary school. His music. He could play for Elise all the way, through without a single mistake. Mrs. Rodriguez said it was the best rendition she'd heard from any of her students, and she'd been teaching for over 50 years. Michael practiced that piece so much that his parents could hum it in their sleep. One afternoon in late February, Mrs. Rodriguez had a serious conversation with Michael and his parents after their lesson. She'd been thinking about something for weeks, weighing the risks and rewards in her mind. "There's a spring talent show at Michael's school," she began, folding her hands in her lap. "I think he should perform." The room went silent. Michael's mom and dad exchanged worried glances. They knew what middle school was like. They'd seen Michael come home with his backpack emptied in the hallway, his homework torn up, his spirit bruised. The idea of putting him on a stage in front of those same kids terrified them. "I don't know," his mom said carefully. "Michael works so hard at piano because it's his safe space. What if performing ruins that for him? What if the kids—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what the kids might do. "I understand your concern," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently, "but I've watched Michael grow these past 2 years. Not just as a pianist, but as a person. He's ready for this, and I think he deserves the chance to show everyone what he's capable of." Michael had been quiet during this exchange, his eyes moving from face to face. Finally, his dad asked him directly, "What do you think, buddy? Do you want to do this?" Michael thought about all the times kids had laughed at him. All the times they'd called him stupid or weird. All the lunch periods spent alone. Then he thought about the piano, about how it made him feel, about the music that flowed through him when everything else in the world seemed so hard. "I want to show them," he said quietly but firmly. His mom's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Michael nodded. He wasn't sure about much in life, but he was sure about this. For once, he wanted people to see what he could do instead of what he couldn't. His parents agreed, though the fear in their hearts didn't go away. They signed him up for the talent show, which was scheduled for the first Friday in April. That gave Michael 6 weeks to prepare. Mrs. Rodriguez kicked their lessons into high gear. They weren't just playing Für Elise anymore. They were perfecting it. Every dynamic, every pause, every subtle emotion in the piece. She taught him how to handle the pressure of performance, how to recover if he made a mistake, how to stay focused even with people watching. "The biggest challenge won't be the music," she told him. "You know this piece inside and out. The challenge will be blocking out everything else. The audience, the nerves, the fear. When you sit at that piano, it needs to be just you and Beethoven. Nothing else exists." At school, news about the talent show spread quickly. Kids signed up to dance, sing, do comedy skits. When Michael's name appeared on the participant list, it became a source of entertainment for some students. "Did you see? That kid Michael is doing the talent show," one boy snickered in the hallway. "What's he gonna do, count to 10? Another replied, and they burst into laughter. Michael heard them but kept walking. He had something they didn't understand, something they couldn't take away from him even with their cruelty. But the comments wore on him. During lunch one day, sitting alone as usual, doubt crept in. What if he forgot the notes? What if his hands shook too much? What if everyone laughed and his performance became a joke that followed him for the rest of middle school? That evening at practice, his playing was off. He fumbled over sections he normally played perfectly. His fingers felt heavy and uncertain. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped him halfway through. "What's wrong?" she asked. Michael stared at the keys. "What if I mess up? What if everyone laughs?" Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. Then she told him a story. "When I was your age, I had to perform at a big recital. I was so nervous that my hands were shaking. My teacher told me something I've never forgotten. She said, "The music doesn't care if you're scared. It only cares if you're honest. When you play, Michael, you're honest. That's your gift. Don't let fear take that away." Michael looked up at her. "But what if I'm not good enough?" "Good enough for who? For kids who don't understand what real talent is? For people who've already made up their minds about you?" She shook her head. "You're not playing for them. You're playing for yourself. You're playing to prove to yourself that you can do something remarkable. Everything else is just noise." Her words helped, but the nerves didn't go away. As the talent show approached, Michael's anxiety grew. He practiced more than ever, sometimes playing Für Elise a dozen times in a row. His parents worried he was putting too much pressure on himself. The night before the talent show, Michael couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through every note of the piece. What if he blanked out? What if his fingers forgot what to do? The stakes felt enormous, like his entire worth as a person rested on these few minutes of performance. Around midnight, his mom heard movement in the house. She found Michael sitting at the keyboard in the living room, just staring at the keys in the darkness. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly, sitting beside him. He shook his head. "You know what I think," she said, putting her arm around him. "I think no matter what happens tomorrow, your dad and I are going to be proud of you. Not because you're performing, but because you were brave enough to try. That takes more courage than most people will ever have. But what if I disappoint everyone?" His mom tilted his chin up so he was looking at her. "Michael, you could never disappoint us, never. You've already overcome more than most people face in a lifetime. Playing piano is just one small part of who you are. Tomorrow, if you walk onto that stage and play one note or all the notes, we'll be proud. Mrs. Rodriguez will be proud, and I hope you'll be proud of yourself too." Michael leaned into his mom's hug, feeling some of the tension leave his body. She was right. He'd already proven himself every single day just by showing up, by trying, by refusing to let the world make him give up. The next morning arrived too quickly. Michael got dressed in the nice outfit his parents had bought for the occasion. Dark pants and a button-up shirt that made him look older, more mature. At breakfast, he could barely eat. His stomach felt like it was full of butterflies having a dance party. At school, the day dragged on forever. Michael couldn't focus in any of his classes. Teachers called on him and he had no idea what they'd asked. Other kids buzzed with excitement about the talent show, making last-minute adjustments to their acts, talking about who would win. Nobody talked about Michael. Most people had forgotten he was even performing. That was fine with him. He wasn't doing this for attention. The final bell rang at 3 o'clock and students flooded into the auditorium. The talent show would start at 3:30, giving everyone time to get settled. Michael went backstage where all the performers were gathering. A girl practiced her singing scales. A group of boys ran through their comedy routine. A dance crew stretched and went over their choreography. Michael found a quiet corner and sat down, his hands folded in his lap. Mrs. Rodriguez found him there 15 minutes before the show started. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Scared," he admitted. "Good, that means you care. Just remember, you and Beethoven. Nothing else matters." She squeezed his shoulder. "I'll be right there in the audience. Your parents are in the front row. We're all rooting for you." The auditorium filled with students, teachers, and parents. The energy was chaotic and loud, typical of any middle school event. Michael peeked out from behind the curtain and saw hundreds of faces. His heart hammered in his chest. The principal took the stage to welcome everyone and explain the rules. Then the show began. Michael watched from backstage as act after act performed. Each one received polite applause, some more enthusiastic than others. Then he heard it. Next up, we have Michael performing Beethoven's Für Elise. This was it. The moment that would change everything. Michael took a deep breath and stepped toward the stage, his legs feeling like they might not hold him up. Behind him, he could hear a few performers whispering, probably placing bets on whether he'd actually be able to play. None of that mattered now. It was time to show everyone, especially himself, what he was really made of. Michael walked onto the stage, and immediately the atmosphere in the auditorium shifted. The casual chatter didn't stop, it got worse. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a wave. Students nudged each other and pointed. Some pulled out their phones, probably expecting to record something they could laugh about later. The stage lights were brighter than Michael had imagined, They made everything beyond the first few rows disappear into darkness. He could see his parents in the front, his mom gripping his dad's hand so tight her knuckles were white. A few rows back, Mrs. Rodriguez sat with her hands clasped together, her face calm but her eyes filled with hope. Michael's legs felt shaky as he walked toward the piano positioned at center stage. Each step seemed to take forever. Behind him he heard someone snicker. Then another voice, louder this time, said something he couldn't quite make out, but the tone was mocking. More laughter bubbled up from different sections of the auditorium. A teacher tried to shush the students, but it was like trying to stop the ocean. The noise continued. Michael reached the piano bench and stood beside it for a moment, suddenly frozen. This was so much harder than he'd imagined. In Mrs. Rodriguez's living room, it was just him and the music. Here, hundreds of eyes were on him, most of them expecting him to fail. His hands trembled as he sat down on the bench. He adjusted his position, remembering everything Mrs. Rodriguez had taught him. Sit up straight, feet flat on the floor, hands relaxed. But his hands didn't feel relaxed. They felt like they belonged to someone else. From somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, a boy's voice rang out clearly. "This is gonna be hilarious." More laughter. A few teachers stood up trying to restore order, but the damage was done. Michael felt his chest tighten. His vision blurred slightly. This was a mistake. He should never have agreed to this. He could just stand up and walk off stage right now, and maybe everyone would forget about it eventually. But then he thought about all those Tuesday afternoons with Mrs. Rodriguez, all the hours of practice, all the times he'd played this piece perfectly at home, all the moments when music had been the only thing that made sense in a confusing world. He thought about his mom's words the night before. "You're brave enough to try." Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, something had changed. The auditorium was still noisy. People were still laughing. But somehow it felt farther away, like it was happening in a different room. He lifted his hands and placed them over the keys. His fingers found their starting positions automatically, muscle memory taking over. He could feel the smooth surface of the keys beneath his fingertips. For just a moment, everything else disappeared. Then he began to play. The opening notes of Für Elise drifted into the auditorium, soft and delicate, exactly as they were meant to be played. The effect was immediate and stunning. The laughter died in people's throats. The whispers stopped mid-sentence. It was as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire room. Michael didn't notice. He was somewhere else now, lost in the music. His fingers moved across the keys with a confidence and grace that seemed impossible. This wasn't the uncertain boy who stumbled through hallways and sat alone at lunch. This was an artist completely in control of his craft. The melody flowed from the piano like water, each note perfectly placed, each phrase shaped with genuine understanding. Michael's eyes were closed now, his body swaying slightly with the music. His face showed pure concentration mixed with something else, joy. This was where he belonged. This was what he was meant to do. In the audience, mouths hung open in disbelief. The same kids who had been laughing moments ago now sat completely still, transfixed. A girl in the third row had tears streaming down her face and didn't even know why. A boy who had tormented Michael in gym class just last week stared at the stage with an expression of complete shock. Michael's mom covered her mouth with both hands, tears flowing freely. His dad sat perfectly still, barely breathing, afraid that any movement might break the spell. Mrs. Rodriguez had a knowing smile on her face, the look of a teacher watching her student finally show the world what she'd known all along. The piece continued, moving through its various sections. When it reached the faster, more complex middle portion, Michael's fingers flew across the keys with precision and speed. This was the part that had taken him months to master, the part he'd practiced until his hands ached. Now those hours of work paid off. Every note was crystal clear, every run perfectly executed. Teachers who had been standing at the back of the auditorium slowly moved closer, drawn by what they were hearing. The school principal, who had seen hundreds of talent shows over the years, leaned forward in his seat, amazed. This wasn't just good for a middle school talent show. This was genuinely impressive by any standard, but the most remarkable thing wasn't the technical skill, though that was impressive enough. It was the emotion. Michael played with a depth of feeling that professional pianists spent years trying to achieve. Every dynamic change, every pause, every subtle shift in tempo, it all served the music. He wasn't just playing notes on a page. He was telling Beethoven's story, channeling something beautiful and timeless through his hands. A few students pulled out their phones, but not to mock this time. They were recording because they wanted to remember this moment. They wanted proof that they'd witnessed something extraordinary. The piece moved into its final section, returning to the gentle opening melody. Michael's playing became soft again, almost whisper quiet. The auditorium was so silent that you could hear the mechanical click of the keys, the soft thump of the dampers. No one coughed. No one moved. Everyone was holding their breath. Michael played the final notes with exquisite tenderness, letting them hang in the air before slowly lifting his hands from the keys. He held them there for a moment, suspended as the last sounds faded into silence. Then he opened his eyes and lowered his hands to his lap. He sat very still, suddenly aware of where he was again. The stage lights, the crowd, the reality of what had just happened. For 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3, nothing. Complete silence. Michael felt a flutter of panic. Had he done something wrong? Had everyone hated it? Then the auditorium exploded. It started with one person standing, Mrs. Rodriguez, tears streaming down her face, clapping with all her might. Then Michael's parents shot to their feet. Then the principal. Then teachers. Then students, row by row, like dominoes falling, until the entire auditorium was on its feet. The applause was deafening. It wasn't polite clapping. It was thunderous, overwhelming, the kind of applause that shakes the walls. Students were cheering, whistling, shouting. Some were crying. Teachers stood with proud smiles, clapping until their hands hurt. Michael sat frozen on the piano bench, unable to process what was happening. This was the same group of people who had been laughing at him just minutes ago. Now they were giving him a standing ovation. It didn't make sense. His brain couldn't catch up with reality. A boy in the 5th row was crying openly, making no attempt to hide it. This was Ryan, the same kid who had tripped Michael in the hallway last month, who had called him names, who had made his life miserable. Now Ryan stood with tears running down his face, clapping harder than anyone. Something inside him fundamentally changed by what he'd just witnessed. Throughout the auditorium, similar transformations were happening. Kids who had mocked Michael, who had excluded him, who had treated him as less than human, they were seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as someone to pity or ridicule, but as someone with a gift they could never match. The applause continued, growing louder instead of fading. Students started chanting, "Michael! Michael! Michael!" The sound echoed off the walls, surrounded him, lifted him up. Finally, Michael stood up from the bench. His legs were still shaky, but for a different reason now. He faced the audience and gave a small, awkward bow, the way Mrs. Rodriguez had taught him. His face broke into a huge smile, genuine and pure and full of disbelief. As he straightened up, he saw his mom in the front row, sobbing with joy. His dad had his arm around her, his own eyes wet with tears. Mrs. Rodriguez was beaming, nodding at him with pride, and beyond them, hundreds of students on their feet, showing him respect and admiration he'd never experienced in his entire life. Michael walked off the stage, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. As soon as he stepped into the wings, his legs almost gave out. A stagehand steadied him. Other performers who had been waiting backstage crowded around him, patting his back, telling him how amazing that was. The talent show continued, but nothing else that night could match what had just happened. When the judges announced winners at the end, Michael won first place by unanimous decision. But that trophy, as nice as it was, wasn't the real prize. The real prize came in the days and weeks that followed, when everything changed. The Monday after the talent show, Michael walked through the school doors expecting everything to go back to normal. He'd had an amazing weekend. His parents took him out for ice cream. Mrs. Rodriguez called to congratulate him again, and he'd watched the video of his performance at least 20 times. But school was school, and he figured by Monday everyone would have forgotten. He was wrong. As soon as he stepped into the hallway, a group of students turned toward him. Michael's first instinct was to tense up, to prepare for whatever mean comment was coming. But instead, one of them smiled and said, "Hey Michael, that was incredible on Friday. Seriously amazing." Michael blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Thanks," he managed to say. More students noticed him walking down the hall. A girl waved at him. 2 boys gave him a thumbs up. Someone he'd never spoken to before said, "Dude, you crushed it at the talent show." Michael kept waiting for the punchline, for the joke that would reveal this was all some elaborate prank, but it never came. In his first period class, the teacher asked him to stand up. Michael's stomach dropped, assuming he was in trouble for something. Instead, the teacher started clapping, and the entire class joined in. "We're very proud to have such a talented musician in our class," the teacher said with genuine warmth. By lunchtime, Michael's world had completely flipped upside down. He walked into the cafeteria with his blue lunchbox, heading automatically toward his usual lonely table in the corner. But before he could get there, he heard someone call his name. "Michael, over here." He turned to see a group of students waving him over to their table. They were actually making room for him, scooting over so there was a space. Michael stood frozen, uncertain. Was this real? He walked over slowly, waiting for them to laugh and tell him they were kidding, but they didn't. He sat down, and just like that, he was eating lunch with other kids. They asked him about piano, about how long he'd been playing, about how he learned such a difficult piece. They listened when he talked. They were genuinely interested. For the first time in his entire school life, Michael wasn't invisible. The video of his performance had been posted online by his parents, and it started spreading. First just around the school, then to other schools in the district, then beyond. By Wednesday, it had thousands of views. By Friday, it had gone viral. People from around the world were watching Michael play Beethoven, and the comments were overwhelmingly positive. This brought tears to my eyes. Never judge a book by its cover. This kid is incredible. Pure talent and heart. This is what music is supposed to be. I've been playing piano for 20 years, and this boy plays with more feeling than I ever could. Local news stations reached out, wanting to do stories about Michael. The principal called his parents to tell them how proud the school was. Organizations that supported people with Down syndrome asked if Michael would be willing to perform at their fundraising events. Everything was changing so fast it made Michael's head spin. But the most important changes were the small, everyday ones. Ryan, the boy who had bullied Michael for years, approached him one day after school. Michael saw him coming and instinctively braced himself. But Ryan looked different. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by something that looked like shame. "Hey, Michael," Ryan said quietly. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Michael nodded, wary. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For being such a jerk to you." Ryan's voice cracked slightly. "When I saw you play on Friday, I realized what an idiot I've been. You're so talented, and I don't know why I was so mean, but I'm really sorry." Michael had imagined this moment before, someone apologizing for how they'd treated him. In his imagination, he'd had the perfect response prepared, something that would make them feel as bad as they'd made him feel. But now, facing Ryan's genuine remorse, those imaginary words disappeared. "It's okay," Michael said simply. "No, it's not okay. But thank you for saying that." Ryan paused. "If you ever want to hang out or something, I'd like that. If you want to, I mean. I understand if you don't." "Maybe," Michael said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was a door left open just a crack. The transformation at school continued. Teachers who had previously seemed frustrated with Michael's slower pace now looked for ways to adapt their teaching to help him succeed. The music teacher asked if he'd be willing to perform at the spring concert. Other students invited him to birthday parties. He went from eating lunch alone to having to choose which table to sit at. But the most meaningful change happened during his next piano lesson with Mrs. Rodriguez. He arrived at her house buzzing with excitement, ready to tell her about everything that had happened. But when she opened the door, he saw she'd been crying. "What's wrong?" Michael asked, immediately concerned. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled through her tears. "Nothing's wrong, dear boy. Everything is wonderfully right." She led him inside to the piano. "Do you know what you've done? Not just for yourself, but for so many other people?" Michael shook his head, confused. "I've gotten letters," she said, picking up a stack of envelopes from the piano, "from parents of children with Down syndrome, telling me that your performance gave them hope. From teachers saying they'll never underestimate their students again. From young people who feel different, who now believe they have something valuable to offer the world. You changed minds, Michael. You opened hearts." Michael didn't know what to say. He just wanted to play piano. He hadn't thought about changing anything bigger than people's opinions of him. "That's the power of music," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "It speaks a language everyone understands. And you, my dear student, are fluent in that language in a way most people never will be. You didn't just play notes on Friday. You showed people what's possible when we look past our prejudices and see each other truly. Over the following months, Michael's life continued to evolve. He performed at several charity events, always playing Fur-Elise because it had become his signature piece. Each performance was nerve-wracking, but each one got a little easier. He was learning that he could do hard things, that he could stand on stages and share his gift with the world. But he never let the attention change who he was at his core. He still went to his Tuesday lessons with Mrs. Rodriguez, still practiced diligently, still approached the piano with the same reverence and joy he'd always had. The piano wasn't about fame or applause for Michael. It was about the pure connection between his heart and the music. School became bearable, then actually enjoyable. He joined the music club and made real friends, people who valued him for who he was, not despite his Down syndrome, but including all of him. He discovered that when you stop trying to fit into other people's boxes, you sometimes find your own space where you fit perfectly. His parents watched their son blossom with grateful hearts. The boy who used to come home deflated and sad now bounded through the door with stories about his day. He laughed more. He stood taller. He believed in himself. One evening, about a year after the talent show, Michael sat at the piano in his living room practicing a new piece. His mom was cooking dinner in the kitchen. His dad was reading the newspaper. It was an ordinary moment, the kind that usually passes without notice. But Michael stopped playing for a moment and just looked at his hands on the keys. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the lonely lunches, the cruel words, the tears, the doubt. He thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's patience, his parents' unwavering support, that terrifying walk onto the stage. He thought about how close he'd come to giving up, to believing what other people said about him, and he realized something important. His worth had never changed. He'd always been this person, this talented, capable, valuable human being. The only thing that changed was that other people finally saw it. But more importantly, he saw it himself. Michael returned to his practice, his fingers moving confidently across the keys. The music filled the house, and his mom smiled in the kitchen. His dad lowered his newspaper to listen. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Years later, people would still talk about that talent show performance, about the boy with Down syndrome who silenced an auditorium full of doubters with his gift. The video would be shared countless times, inspiring people across the world. But for Michael, the real victory wasn't that one performance. It was every day after, when he woke up knowing he was enough. It was the friends he made, the confidence he built, the belief that his differences didn't make him less. They made him uniquely himself. The piano had given him a voice when he couldn't find the words. Music had built a bridge between him and a world that hadn't known how to reach him, and in learning to play, he'd taught everyone around him a far more important lesson: that human potential can't be measured by standardized tests or conventional expectations. That everyone has a gift if only we take the time to help them unwrap it. Michael's story didn't end with applause. It continued in every note he played, in every student Mrs. Rodriguez taught after him with renewed faith in her ability to reach anyone, in every parent who watched the video and saw new possibilities for their own child, in every person who remembered to look deeper before making judgments. One performance changed a middle school auditorium, but the courage it took to walk onto that stage, that changed a life. And sometimes when we're brave enough to show the world who we really are, we change it too.